with Miss Neeley, The Iguanodon's Horn by Sean Rubin. How artists and scientists put a dinosaur back together again and again and again. The Iguanodon's Horn. The Iguanodon died a long time ago. A really long time ago. A bit of a bummer way to start a story, but hang on. When Iguanodon died, soil and rock were covered her bones. She fell apart. Above her, the earth changed. Many years later, humans began to explore. They didn't always understand what they found. When humans stumbled across the remains of animals like Iguanodon, they created stories about them. They thought the bones came from creatures of myth. Bacillus, European dragon, Chinese dragon, monsters and dragons. As humans discovered more about the natural world, they began to use experiments and observation to better understand their discoveries. Today, we call this science. 1700 chemistry. Science is a process. When humans do science, they create theories, sets of ideas about how the world works. Sometimes the ideas are right. Sometimes they're only part right. And sometimes the ideas seem right, even when they're actually wrong. 1785, geology. 1859, natural selection. 1811, prehistoric reptiles discovered. And then? That's because we may not have enough information to know for sure. Not yet, anyway. Whenever new information is discovered, an old theory may be broken down and rebuilt, and rebuilt, and rebuilt. Because science is a process that never ends. 1822, first Iguanodon fossil discovered. But it needs to start somewhere. Sean Rubin, The Iguanodon's Horn. How artists and scientists put a dinosaur back together again and again and again. One day, a human named Mary Ann Mentel was out walking. She came upon a large tooth, unlike any she had ever seen before, buried in the road. Mary Ann examined the tooth with her husband, Gideon. Gideon shared the tooth with other scientists. They thought it may have come from a rhinoceros or an enormous iguana. It didn't. Further evidence. Gideon named the creature it came from, Iguanodon, which means iguana, tooth. Gideon and Mary Ann found more bones and teeth. They wondered what a whole Iguanodon looked like. What do you think it looks like? Reconstructing Iguanodon was like trying to put together an incomplete puzzle. First, the Mantles studied the pieces they had and considered all the evidence. Then they used their imaginations. Their theory was simple. Iguanodon was an enormous reptile who ate plants. They even made drawings so other people could see their ideas. Have you ever done a puzzle? If you have done a puzzle, have you ever done a puzzle without a reference sheet or the picture of the puzzle that you're trying to create? Imagine trying to put together these bones from an animal that you don't even know what it exactly looks like yet. The most mysterious piece of the puzzle was a bony spike. Gideon guessed it was a horn on the Iguanodon's nose. Unfortunately, he guessed wrong. To his credit, Gideon got one thing right. He knew that the bones were old and came from a creature that no one had ever seen before, an animal previously unknown to science. Iguanodon was a dinosaur. The first Iguanodon, ca. 1850. Nose horn, lizard tongue, long dragon tail. Basically an iguana the size of a whale. Whoa. Paleontologist, Gideon Mantell. Artist, Marianne Woodhouse Mantell. Dinosaur, from the ancient Greek, terrible lizard. I do look pretty terrible here. I know what you're thinking. Dinosaurs didn't look anything like this, especially not Iguanodon. But in 1850, people didn't know that yet. Remember, at this point, no one had seen a complete dinosaur skeleton. All they could do was make creative guesses. Really creative guesses. The Mantell's work inspired other scientists to look for dinosaur remains. As more fossils were discovered, artists began creating their own reconstructions, drawings, paintings, and even sculptures of what dinosaurs may have looked like. Have you ever gone to a museum or watched any documentaries about dinosaurs and fossils? You may be able to make that connection for this story. Because most skeletons were incomplete, artists based their work on animals they already knew. Lizards, whales, and, yes, rhinoceroses. Their imaginations took off from there. Pterosaur, Hylosaurus, Megalosaurus, Iguanodon, Plesiosaur, Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins, 1807. They drew dinosaurs as scaly monsters locked in mortal combat, rising out of murky swamps. These were the first paleo artists who interpret fossils and help us understand how extinct creatures may have appeared and behaved. One of these artists was Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins. Can you tell how a dinosaur behaved just by its bones? What do you think? The indignity. In 1852, Benjamin created enormous dinosaur sculptures for a special exhibit in London. To celebrate the exhibit, Benjamin invited a group of scientists to a New Year's Eve dinner inside the Iguanodon's sculpture. To create his Iguanodon, Benjamin worked with Richard Owen, the paleontologist who coined the term dinosaur. The sculptures were very popular. People came from all over to see them. Unfortunately, they were totally inaccurate. Imagine going to an Iguanodon restaurant. That would seem really fancy. Crystal Palace Iguanodon, ca. 1854. Nose horn, huge claws, sharp teeth, thick scales, walks on all fours, slow moving, looks something like a cross between a rhinoceros and an iguana. Paleontologist Sir Richard Owen, artist Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins. Seriously, this is embarrassing. Still, there was a reason to be optimistic. Someone was bound to put Iguanodon back together the right way. Eventually, now that everyone knew dinosaurs existed, even more people were on the lookout for fossils. New information was sure to turn up. It didn't take long. Who do you think is at the bottom of this ladder? Could you imagine living in a time where this giant iguanodon was roaming the earth? I'd be a little scared of you as now. In 1878, Belgian coal miners found fossilized iguanodon skeletons 1,000 feet below the Earth's surface. Complete skeletons, all the bones. The scientist who reassembled these skeletons was Louis Dolo. Louis was working with new clues about Iguanodon, clues that showed the old theories weren't quite right, because he had complete skeletons. Louis knew that to put them together correctly, he'd have to start from scratch. First, Louis compared the Iguanodon bones to the skeletons of other animals in his museum. He thought Iguanodon's big hind limbs and smaller forelimbs looked a bit like a giant flightless bird, an emu. But the dinosaur's limbs also reminded him of a kangaroo or a wallaby. Unfortunately, Louis based his reconstruction more on the wallaby. He guessed wrongly that Iguanodon stood upright on two legs and dragged her tail. On the plus side, Louis discovered that Iguanodon's so-called nose horn wasn't a nose horn at all. Turns out she had two of them, and they attached to her hands. Wallaby, emu, Iguanodon. Drag my tail? I would never. Iguanodon had thumb spikes. Thanks to Louis's work, Iguanodon finally looked nothing like a rhinoceros. Thumb spike, Iguanodon hand. Notice how our theory of what the Iguanodon is changing based on new information. The new information is full and complete skeleton structure, and it's changing our theory of how the Iguanodon looks or stands. Oh, yawn. 20th century Iguanodon, ca. 1900s to 1970. Thumb spikes, stands upright, drags its tail, lizard tongue and lips, probably lumbers, kind of like a big bipedal kangaroo-shaped motor lizard. Paleontologist Louis Dolo, artist Charles Knight and Rudolf Zillinger. Louis's version of Iguanodon inspired countless artists, including Charles Knight and muralist Rudolf Zillinger. In the following years, paleo artists depicted dinosaurs as lumbering, tail-dragging, cold-blooded reptiles, too dim-witted to avoid extinction. These inaccurate images led some humans to believe, also inaccurately, that dinosaurs were, well, boring. By the beginning of the 20th century, dinosaur studies had entered a slump. Fortunately, they didn't stay in a slump for long. In fact, dinosaurs were about to take flight. For over a century, dinosaurs were thought to be a lot like reptiles. But by the 1960s, new evidence challenged these assumptions. Crucial information came from trackways, a series of fossilized dinosaur footprints. Modern reptiles are cold-blooded and drag their tails, leaving grooves in the dirt behind them. When Iguanodon tracks were discovered, scientists were surprised to find no tail grooves. While the trackways showed Iguanodon had walked on four legs, she had held her tail even with the ground like a bird. Most importantly, there was evidence that dinosaurs lived active lifestyles. They hunted and even migrated. The evidence also suggested that dinosaurs may have been warm-blooded, like mammals or birds. A scientist named John Ostrom had started to form a new theory, a set of ideas that would simply change the way humans imagine dinosaurs. What if dinosaurs weren't just like reptiles after all? What if dinosaurs were a lot more like birds? Interesting. Theories are arising. What do you think? Just as Lewis had broken down Gideon's version of Iguanodon, now John would break down everyone's version of almost every dinosaur. This was a huge job. He considered all the information, old and new, and came up with fresh ideas. 1969. Deinonychus identified. I'm not very good with my dinosaur pronunciations. I should ask my children to read them for me. They've taught me all the dinosaur names that I know today. John's theory was strengthened by the discovery of Deinonychus, a fossilized dinosaur that clearly resembled a bird skeleton. John asked his friend Bob Baker, a scientist who was also an artist, to draw a picture of an active, warm-blooded, bird-like dinosaur so that others could understand his ideas. Not only did dinosaurs act like birds, some even looked like birds. Here we have a drawing of the dinosaur and a roadrunner bird. Humans began to change their minds about dinosaurs. Much of what they thought they knew had been based on incomplete information. The scientists and artists were determined to fix their mistakes. Using new information, scientists remounted museum fossils in more bird-like poses with their tails up. Artists began to draw and paint dinosaurs that looked smart, active, and warm-blooded. Finally. Some call this time the dinosaur renaissance. Renaissance means rebirth. Dinosaurs were reborn, and everyone noticed. Take a look at here. We have scientists and engineers and construction workers rehanging tails and bodies of these dinosaur skeletons to show a more logical way that they stood or moved. The Renaissance Iguanodon, ca. 1970 to 2000. Thumb spikes, typically quadrupedal as adults, may stand on two legs to reach food. Bipedal, when young, warm-blooded, swan neck, no lips, beak. Skin pulled tight over its body, little soft tissue or color. Paleontologist John Ostrom, artist Bob Baker, John D. Dawson. Notice how much our Iguanodon has changed throughout this story. As we get more information and more details, more scientific evidence, it supports a new theory of what this Iguanodon was like. Notice too how each time we have a new paleontologist, a new person with this theory, and a new artist to support the ideas and the drawings of these theories. By the year 2000, scientists could make many informed guesses about Iguanodon. They knew she had a spike on her hand. They thought she usually walked on four legs, although not always. She almost certainly held her tail even with the ground. I can make a connection to this picture. I feel like I've seen this type of dinosaur in the movie Dinosaur, which was a popular dinosaur movie when I was growing up, and in other kids' dinosaur movies and shows that I've seen. Scientists were also pretty sure iguanodons were warm-blooded, lived in groups, built nests, and cared for their young, like birds. Artists drew Iguanodon according to what scientists thought, but some artists were beginning to wonder why dinosaurs always looked so scrawny, bony, and sort of shrink-wrapped. Many animals alive today have feathers or fur. What's more, they have curves, fat, fleshy bits, and other soft tissue that isn't obvious if you're just looking at a skeleton. Any idea what animal the skull came from? Let's take a look first at this chicken. If you were to look at this skeleton, could you tell that this skeleton of a chicken had feathers, or even was a chicken in general? No, right? What do you think this skeleton is coming from? What animal does this skull come from? Looks like it has a giant jaw, some giant front teeth, potentially missing a tooth on the other side, or we just can't see it. The hippopotamus. Are you surprised? Hippos don't look much like their skeletons. That's because most of the hippo isn't bones. A hippo is also made of skin, hair, muscle, and fat. Extra hippo. If you try to draw a hippo without any extras, it might look something like this. Not cool. Freaky hippopotamus reconstruction. Dinosaurs were no different. Bones can't tell us everything about a dinosaur shape, and it's important to look at other clues, including fossilized skin, muscle, and feathers. Once again, artists are studying all the evidence, then letting their imagination run wild. They're giving dinosaurs more fat and more feathers, and dinosaurs have changed again. Dinosaurs weren't monsters. They weren't dragons. They were animals. Like modern animals, they came in all sorts of colors. They smelled funny. Dinosaurs had baggy bits and saggy bits. They made messes and strange noises. And they had weird, showy parts that only existed to attract mates. Tail quills. These very colorful and unique drawings of some dinosaurs. Are any of these drawings accurate? Unless someone invents a time machine, we'll probably never know for sure. Still, any day now, someone could find something new. An artist could figure out another piece of the puzzle. And what you thought you knew about dinosaurs could change. Again. Speculative Iguanodon. 2000 onward. Thumb spikes, more soft tissue, quadrupedal, large and muscular, forelimb ending something like a hoof, possible keratin quills, or even feathers, varied coloring, inspired by the art of John Conway and Natty Hemapan. This is the finality of the Iguanodon as of right now, compared to what it started off at the beginning of the book. The book ends with just some author notes. If you're interested in reading, you can pause on the page of the author notes, which just talks about different points about the different pages that we've read together, and then some acknowledgments over at the bottom. Thank you so much for reading with me, the Iguanodon's Horn. And before you end this video, I want you to think about, why is science ever changing? Why is science always changing? And what is something that you're interested in exploring through science? Thank you again for reading with me, and have an amazing rest of your day.